All right, welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we are completely unpacking the comprehensive scientific data surrounding arguably the most heavily researched artifact in human history, the Shroud of Turin. We are taking a strictly analytical approach here. We're going to lean heavily into the massive array of scientific studies done on this cloth, and we're going to treat tools like X-ray spectrum data and microchemical analysis, not just as boring textbook terms, but as our primary investigative instruments to decode a truly mind-bending anomaly. So, can modern science actually solve this? For centuries, the shroud, which, if you're not familiar, is a linen cloth bearing this faint, photonegative image of a severely beaten and crucified man, well, it was purely a matter of faith and history. But right around the late 20th century, it basically became the ultimate test subject for modern science. Let's explore exactly how cutting-edge forensics intersect with an ancient mystery and see if the rigorous scientific method can actually explain an object that seemingly defies the laws of physics. Section 1. The 1978 STIRP Investigation. Science Meets the Shroud. Okay, back in 1978, a really diverse team of scientists called the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, was given 120 hours of completely unprecedented access to the cloth. And they didn't just look at it, you guys, they brought an absolute arsenal of tech. We're talking low-power X-rays, ultraviolet and infrared photography, and honestly, believe it or not, they used everyday sticky tape to pull microscopic debris right off the fibers. Their primary goal wasn't to prove who the cloth belonged to, but just to scientifically figure out how on earth the image was formed. Now, here's where the X-ray spectrum data absolutely becomes the star witness. If a medieval artist had painted this, X-ray fluorescence would have immediately flagged the heavy metals, things like iron or lead, that are super common in medieval paints. But the spectrum data? It came back completely blank. No paint, no dyes, no stains on the image fibers. This hard scientific data conclusively proved the image was definitively not a painting. It's essentially just a chemical ghost. Think for a second about how flat a standard photograph is, right? Well, when researchers fed photos of the shroud into a NASA VP8 image analyzer, which is a tool literally used to map planetary landscapes, the data spiked perfectly. It revealed a true, undistorted 3D topography of a human face and body. You can't get that from a normal photo or painting. Plus, the blood stains were chemically verified as real human blood, type AB positive. And the image itself. It only rests on the absolute topmost layer of the microfibers, presenting as this hyper-aged yellowing of the linen. Moving on to Section 2. Botanical and Forensic Evidence. Clues in the Dust. So a cloth traveling through hundreds of years of history basically acts like a giant microscopic sponge. Using those sticky tape samples we mentioned, Swiss criminologist Dr. Max Frey extracted actual pollen grains. By studying the unique shapes of the pollen X signs under a microscope, he mapped out a fascinating botanical trail. And while, yeah, there was European pollen present, a really significant cluster of it matched plants that are completely exclusive to the areas around Jerusalem, Turkey, and the wider Middle East. It gets crazier. Researchers also discovered these super faint outlines of flowers on the fabric that perfectly match the corona electrostatic discharge of specific plants from Jerusalem. Now, in simple terms, a corona electrostatic discharge is kind of like a bioelectric aura, an energy signature left behind by the plant's natural electricity. They actually had to use high-contrast photographic enhancement just to spot these faint floral outlines surrounding the body image. So this forensic botany essentially acts as a highly specific GPS tracker. It strongly anchors the cloth's origins to the exact geographic region of Judea. Professor Avinoam Danon, who's a leading authority on Near East botany, analyzed these floral images alongside the pollen data. He even managed to narrow down the common blooming time for these incredibly specific, geographically concentrated plants to right around March and April. Section 3. The 1988 Carbon-14 Test. A medieval hoax? Just a decade after the STIRP investigation, radiocarbon dating dropped a bombshell that threatened to close the case for good. Despite all that compelling forensic and chemical evidence pointing to a much older date, in 1988, a single, tiny snippet was carefully cut from the outside edge of the cloth. It was divided up, sent off for accelerator mass spectrometry, and it yielded a time frame that squarely matched the medieval era, 1260 to 1390 AD. Let's look at this data. 3 completely independent laboratories in Arizona, Oxford, and Zurich returned exceptionally consistent dates with a 95% confidence level. They placed the cloth squarely in the Middle Ages. The British Museum subsequently came out and declared the shroud a hoax, but to the scientists who were actually looking at the broader chemical and X-ray spectrum data, these medieval dates clashed violently with literally all the rest of the physical evidence.
Which brings us to Section 4, challenging the radiocarbon date, the contamination twist.
You see, the golden rule of carbon dating is that your sample absolutely must represent the whole object. But when scientists, including STIRP thermal chemist Ray Rogers, went back and reviewed the chemical spectrum data from that specific 1988 test corner, they found a stark contrast. The snippet they tested actually contained cotton fibers spliced into the linen. Plus, it contained vanillin, a decaying chemical completely absent from the main shroud. The cotton in the test sample had even been dyed brown to visually match the yellowing of the older original linen. I mean, how wild is that?
Because of these glaring chemical discrepancies, Raymond Rogers proved that the radiocarbon team had inadvertently dated a medieval repair. Basically, it was a piece of invisible reweaving added by nuns after a localized fire in 1532. And get this, more recent highly advanced X-ray scattering tests and fiber tensile strength tests have bypassed the carbon contamination entirely. That new X-ray data suggests the cloth is actually around 2,000 years old, blowing the medieval theory out of the water and keeping the debate very much alive.
Section 5. Historical and Forensic Links. The Siderium Connection. Now, this is where comparative science steps in and gets super interesting. The Siderium of Oviedo is a blood-stained face cloth with a rock-solid documented chain of custody tracing back to at least the 9th century, way before those 1988 carbon dates. It doesn't have an image on it, but when you overlay its blood-stained geometry with the shroud, it's a near-perfect forensic match. Both cloths feature type AB-positive blood, they share the same Middle Eastern pollen profile, and they exhibit the exact same puncture wound patterns. Furthermore, forensic physicians concluded that the blood flow on both of these cloths proves the victim died from asphyxiation in a vertical position, which is a hallmark of crucifixion. Under ultraviolet light, scientists also spotted serum retraction rings around the bloodstains. Simply put, these are specific cellular halos that literally only form when blood falls from actively clotting wounds of a living or recently deceased person. So again, this absolutely isn't a painted medieval replica. Finally, Section 6. An ongoing scientific mystery. What science can't explain. The physics of this image are just mind-bending. The image acts exactly like a photographic negative projected vertically through empty space onto the fibers, a process known as orthogonal projection. It's totally independent of the body's physical weight or pressure on the cloth. The shading is based entirely on distance. It's essentially a highly accelerated aging or oxidation that is just a single microscopic fibril deep. As STIRP team member John Heller famously pointed out, you're caught in a paradox. If you try to explain it chemically, the physics are wrong. If you try to explain it physically, the chemistry is wrong. It completely lacks the brushstrokes of art, but it also completely defies the organic, messy chaos of natural decomposition. Even after 120 hours of the most rigorous testing, the team simply could not replicate it. So what does this all mean? Well, the leading physical theory for how this actually happened requires something incredible. It requires a sudden, short, and intensely powerful burst of radiation or light emanating from the body itself. This flash perfectly scorched the topmost fibers in a flawless three-dimensional projection without burning the entire cloth. And that's where we stand today. Despite decades of intense scrutiny from perfectly blank X-ray spectrum data and complex mass spectrometry to botanical mapping and forensic pathology, the exact mechanism that imprinted this anomalous image continues to completely elude our greatest scientific minds. Thanks to the data, we know exactly what the shroud is made of, but the creation of the image itself remains a massive scientific blind spot. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. While modern science has conclusively proven what the image isn't, will future scientific advancements finally decode what it actually is, or will it forever remain history's most fascinating cold case? The data forces us to keep asking these tough questions. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.